The Murim, the magical place where beggars are pillars of society and my grandma's ginger tea can turn you into a god. From the Manhwa sect to the heavenly demon divine cult, the Korean manhwa scene would be incomplete if we took away the chivalrous martial arts heroes populating some of today's most popular titles. But if you're like me, you may have been wondering, who the hell came up with this stuff? I'll admit I'm an idiot, so it wasn't until about the 21st manhwa with a poison user who just so happened to come from Sichuan and just so happened to belong to a family named the Tang clan that I thought, that's a funny coincidence. Must be like how the United States of America is made of United States and is located in America. Then after reading maybe a dozen more and realizing they all had the same power system and made up places like China, I couldn't help but think, this is definitely on purpose. Must be like how they hide the ice wall on the world map. That brings us to this. If so many manhwa are using the Murim as a setting, where exactly did it come from? Well, you beautiful people obliterated the 300 comment goal on the cultivation video, so that's the question I'll be answering today. But before I do, I'll have to explain just what the Murim is for anyone unfamiliar. The word Murim is the Korean pronunciation of the word Wulin. This translates to martial forest and refers to the fictional society of martial artists in the Chinese Wuxia genre. If you don't know what Wuxia is either, you missed a banger video, but Senior is gracious and will provide insights for your enlightenment. The Wuxia genre is a form of historical fantasy that tells tale of the adventures of martial artists in ancient China. Being fantasy, the abilities of the martial artists are exaggerated through diligent training and meditation and the consumption of spiritual herbs and elixirs. Experts grow their physical strength and cultivate internal energy, qi, until they are able to pierce jade, shatter rock, withstand poisons, and survive the elements. While father says being married to a black woman grants these same powers, I've yet to confirm firsthand. The other, equally important aspect of Wuxia stories, as I said, is that they are historical. They all take place in the central plains of ancient China, featuring fictionalized versions of real groups that existed in the past. Think Arthur Pendragon and the Knights of the Round Table for a Western equivalent. We're about to go on a very long tangent, but to understand why such a specifically defined genre rose to international prominence, we'll have to look at where it came from in the first place. I finally completed my literary studies. In all of Hangzhou, if I claim to be the second best in the art of poetry, no one will dare say that they are first. With the text I have prepared, I shall surely impress Lady Pan. Meanwhile, at the Pan family. My little Jin Lian, joyous news! Court official Ning from the nearby Anhui province has agreed to take you as his third wife. You will no longer need to slave away for this poor father. Pan Jinlian expresses concern in lack of female voice actor. Worry not, my daughter. His first wife is barren and his second passed away before leaving behind a child, so your position in the family will surely be secure. Pan Jinlian expresses joy in lack of female voice actor. Lady Pan! With love, water is enough. Without love, food doesn't satisfy. Different flowers catch different eyes. Shi Naian professes his deep love for Lady Pan through a carefully constructed prose, and in turn, Pan Jinlian inquires about his wealth. In lack of female voice actor. I only have this much to my name, but should you accept me as husband, I shall immediately spend it to purchase a lot that we may start our lives together. Give. Go. You accept my intentions? I shall prepare to receive you right away. Sucker. Daddy, inform Sir Ning I am ready to join him at once. The next day. You shall pay for your own drinks if you do not cease that insufferable wailing at once. The heavens cannot forgive those villains. Fool. A woman asked for all your money, so you just gave it to her. Worse, when you returned to take her away and found her husband, instead of leaving, you attacked a court official and got beat up by his guards. I challenged him to a duel and he dared not accept, abusing his authority to pressure the lady to join his unjust oppression. Were I a warrior, I would have slain those fiends all. Leave dreams of Song Jiang to the children and find work. Song Jiang, the hero recorded in the palace memorial? Indeed, a dragon among men. The government with their tens of thousands of men dared not oppose his band of 36 as they crossed the central plains at will. If I had so fearsome a strength, I would not need put one court official in my eyes. You cannot take the tales of that outlaw to be true. Did not a force numbering in the thousands need to employ unjust stratagems to subdue a measly few dozen? The Emperor's officials have always been without chivalry. You're going to get put on a list. If I could scream from the rooftops of the injustices that persist, I would let my throat tear. You're going to get put on a list. Had the people my literacy, I would author a text calling out for virtuous heroes to admonish the crimes of the court and the temptations of women, and I would spread that scripture all through the lands. You are going to get put on a list. In fact, I shall begin this great quest at once. Get me another. Shi Naian went on to be credited with writing one of the 4 great classic Chinese novels, Water Margin, that is held in the same esteem as Journey to the West and Romance of the Three Kingdoms. It told a fictional version of the events of the life of Song Jiang and painted he and his men as heroes who gathered to rebel against the injustices of the government. The number of his outlaws was increased to 108 for the story, and upon their gathering at the Liaoning Marsh, the modern-day idea of the JIANGHU came to be. Yes, this is still a Murim video. If you've read enough Murim or Wuxia stories, you likely came across the word JIANGHU at some point. As its literal translation is rivers and lakes, the term is rarely translated to English because it loses all meaning. The idea behind the name, Rivers and Lakes, is to describe a place far from the emperor and his government's reach. A wilderness, so to speak, typically in the rural areas. Being outside the imperial scope of influence, the JIANGHU is a sort of underworld. Bandit lairs, inns, roads, deserted temples, and all that. As the law doesn't actually extend into this world, the people are governed by the principles of chivalry, and enforcing these principles falls to the most respected members of the JIANGHU. In your typical Murim Manhwa, this duty would fall to the Murim Alliance. In Water Margin, this fell to the 108 outlaws after they were granted amnesty by the government who failed to subdue them. This is where the idea of a non-interference pact between the Murim and government originated, when real-life Song Jiang was offered amnesty by the emperor to stop his continuous attacks. Now, the story of Shi Naian isn't over. As Water Margin circulated in a time of civil discontent, the government obviously couldn't ignore a call for people to rise against imperial rule in favor of some brotherhood between outlaws. Pride Month wasn't a thing back then. The problem, however, was that they couldn't just ban the book. My brothers and sisters in Dao, I promise they tried. If you remember from the video about science and fantasy worlds, when water margin was published in the 14th century, the printing press didn't exist, and the Chinese government strictly controlled the movable type, so the large-scale reproduction of text was their exclusive power. Now, you might think this would make it easier to ban a book, but the thing is, that didn't matter if people couldn't read anyway. The story was performed by actors and in operas, and spread by word of mouth in everyday conversation. In fact, Water Margin was so successful at vilifying Pan Jin Lian that the descendants of her family and Xinayans feuded until less than 2 decades ago, and the name became famous throughout Chinese history as their Jezebel, with a number of stories employing her as a femme fatale, which is French for wood. If Xinayan's anti-woman messages were that pervasive in Chinese culture despite only being secondary to his Confucian call to live a life of virtue, it's easy to understand why the government couldn't hold back the spread of his book. Though that's not to say that they didn't try. As any good Chinese origin story, the tale of how the wuxia genre came to be would be incomplete without government propaganda. Since people could not be prevented from telling the story of Song Jiang, the court officials decided to fight fire with fire and give the people another story to tell about him. They authored their own books about the evil acts committed by Song Jiang and his men, describing crimes against common people and painting them as mass murderers. However, like my love life, the smear campaign was a failure. One book turned into 20 real quick, with various writers adding details to relationships, providing epilogues, and carrying on the story that sad man began. Fast forward a few hundred years, and in the 20th century, as fantasy literature rose in prominence, the martial heroes of ancient China were turned into legitimate superhumans to give the modern folk reasonable what-have-yous for their impossible achievements. The Wulin/Murim was then shaped into the form most of us recognize by Jin Yong, Gu Long, and Liang Yusheng, who sadly will not be getting their own section because I do not have enough patrons to quit my job and casually make 3-hour videos. Instead, I will take this opportunity to punish my subscribers who failed to recognize the immensity of heaven and earth. Now that we know how Murim started, here's how it's going. Psst, I see ancestors. Nana on the beach, yo. Copyright. Heavenly Demon, I'ma run it on 10,000. Murim Alliance, your demonic daddy coming. I was happy making a completely normal video. Blame this guy and everyone else who voted in favor of cringe for that atrocity. Go down in the comments right now and say again/never again. First one to 100 comments decides if we get more cringe in the future. But for now, your suffering isn't over. Follow the Tao until the plum blossoms bloom. Through the path of the sword, all your dreams they shall come true. Mount Wa- No! I'm sorry, I'll be normal now. Don't leave. Musical productions aside, allow me to shed light on the Murim. As I said before, this martial society is one set in the lawless wilderness that is the JIANGHU. As a result, no matter how virtuous the origins may have been, without the threat of repercussions, it's only natural that some individuals with superhuman power would become corrupted. Because of this, the Murim is broadly divided into 3 groups. The Orthodox, or Just faction, are your chivalrous heroes that believe that martial arts are sacred, honorable, and should be used on behalf of the weak. The unorthodox or unjust faction tend to be more neutral when it comes to matters of chivalry, but are not good people in any way. They don't mind trickery, disregard honor, and always work with personal gain in mind. The last of the three is the demonic path. They're outright villains. Human sacrifices, treachery, animation of the dead, slavery, they do anything for strength and submit only to strength. The three forces typically keep one another in balance and are always fighting unless one side has recently had a major victory or a mysterious fourth power who threatens them all appears. Within the orthodox faction, the most common groups you can expect to find in a Murim Manhwa are the Plum Blossom Swordsmen of the Manhwa sect, the Information Brokers of the Beggars sect, the Taoists of the Wudang sect, of the Ame, the Swordsmen of the Mountain and the Church of Lord Twigo, the monks of the Shaolin, the Poisoners of the Tang clan, and the Scholars of the Jegal clan. The unorthodox faction isn't as consistent as the orthodox, and the only notable group that comes to mind for me would have to be the Beggar sect's cousins, the Hao clan / Ignoble clan. They run brothels and gambling dens, and characters will often seek them out for information. Other than them, assassin groups, thief troops, and your everyday brutes would lean in this direction. Last, the most famous group of the demonic path would have to be the Heavenly Demon Divine Cult, which is technically a religious group. As far as individual sects or clans or families are concerned, it's typically the most powerful and balances out against the other factions single-handedly, because it's big enough to have its own subgroups. Their leader, the Heavenly Demon, is typically the strongest and is basically their object of worship. The Blood Cult also belongs to the demonic path, and they're usually inarguably evil. I am afraid no number of views could possibly persuade me to research literally every group ever mentioned and recite their histories like I tried to do with Shinayan and Water Margin, so I'll have to ask all the good people watching who know more than I do to share your findings in the comments for everyone interested. What I want to talk about now is the problem I have with Murim stories. I explained for half the video where and why the wuxia genre started, as a call for people to rise against injustice regardless of the consequences. In Water Margin, as great of a hero as Song Jiang may be, he and most of his men end up dying over the course of the story. Doing the right thing is hard and unrewarding, but that's what makes it the right thing. You think about what your actions will mean for others. I'm not saying I want all the protagonists to always die or meet tragic ends. I don't even mean that I want every Murim story to be told from the perspective of the good guys. Wuxia writers have admitted that including the entire history of the genre in each work would be difficult and impractical, and I agree with them. I just don't like to see the entire spirit that birthed the genre be forgotten. What was once a tale of overcoming hardship and injustice has been degraded into an assortment of OP protagonist series that skip over the part where the main character's meant to have some personal drive or ambition greater than they are. They skip over any recognition of the misery that drives people out of mainstream society and into the lawless world where eating at the wrong place might mean your death. They forget the meaning of chivalry that is in the genre's name, and that lets me down. I can forgive Return of the Blossoming Blade because it aims to tell the story of an individual who has already lived one life. While on the surface it presents an overpowered main character and his effortless conquest of the Murim, that's not the point. He was talented even in his first life, became the strongest, and managed to defeat the ultimate enemy he was presented with. The purpose behind following his second life is a Frieren-esque reflection on all the teachings he failed to understand from his much wiser comrade. He learns to accept the responsibility that comes with strength and the significance of grooming those without his innate ability. If I forget that the story went on for more than one season, I can even praise Reaper of the Drifting Moon. Pure Wall isn't born overpowered. He isn't a martial artist by choice. He's just a victim of those corrupted by their incredible power. While I feel like the character writing is weak, for one season, it tells the perfect wuxia tale of elevating one's martial arts despite the suffering it causes, all for a greater purpose that one could easily have elected not to rise to. Where I draw the line is when the stories become uninspired power fantasies with no substance behind them. Sure, if I read a miscellaneous heavenly demon story like Nano Machine, it'd be a decent way to kill time like watching a random seasonal anime, but I see so many opportunities for the stories to get better that just get thrown away. It is with that disappointment in mind that I have to express my gratitude for the Murim Manhwa that has stayed truest to the martial spirit. Legend of the Northern Blade. This manhwa, as far as I read and remember, is everything a wuxia story is supposed to represent. I'll have to confess that I only had time to reread the first very slow 30 chapters because this video was behind schedule, and I'm basing everything I'm about to say on a nostalgic version of what I remember reading a number of years ago. That being said, Legend of the Northern Blade tells of JIANGHU Wan, the last descendant of the Northern Heavenly Sect. This was a great sect, formed by the many factions of the Murim to act as a front line in the battle against their enemies from the Silent Night. For 100 years it was the Central Plains' greatest force. It was too great a force. After successfully pushing back the Silent Night and achieving peace, those who had used it as a shield then realized that it might now be a spear that would turn against them. The greatest forces of the Murim and chiefest officers of the sect itself conspired to paint Muwan's father a traitor to justify the sect's dissolution. Being the goat, Pops sacrifices himself and takes all the blame for a treason he didn't commit so his son would be spared, and so begins Muwan's life of struggle. The people tasked with guarding Muwan torture him for treasures already stolen long ago. Out of fear that he might one day grow to the strength of his predecessors and seek revenge, he's forbidden from learning martial arts. In his own home, he's disrespected and treated as an unwelcome guest. For years and years and years, he faces adversity. When among the strong, he was the victim of evil, and now that he is weak, he is the victim of the strong. The manhwa follows his search for a purpose, the life experiences through which he learns the true nature of the world, and the honing of his martial arts that have had an ever greater sanctity instilled in them throughout the years. Though martial artists may be superhuman, this story doesn't make the mistake of treating martial arts like superpowers. They aren't buffs that you randomly throw together for cheap power boosts. They aren't quirks that everyone just has and lucks into. Martial arts are sacred treasures, not just because of their war potential, but because they are representatives of the way of life of those who came before you, those who made you into what you are now. I had a whole rant here about where sects originated, the Taoist foundation of cultivation, meaning it was meant to be a spiritual practice, and so on and so forth, but that will have to be a story for another day. Kinda sick of stressing over this one, and I have ideas for videos that are way better than this that I have planned coming up. I'm unfortunately out of bonus videos to upload in the meanwhile, so a drought is coming. If you think you'll miss me too much, become a patron so you can read my light novel and play D&D with me. Thanks to Bolivar Sanchez, Kurumikata, and Lucas HF for joining up already and helping make this video possible. Like, comment, and subscribe, I guess. Until next time, this has been Ken-chan, regretting a promise.